Hey there guys, it's Luis Miranda from LC Design. Today we're going to look at making this splashing skull thing inside of Cinema4D using a little bit of Xparticles and Octane for rendering. Let's get started. Alright, so we're inside of Cinema4D and my scene already has the skull loaded up. If you guys want to follow along exactly with what I'm doing, there's a link in the description that lets you download this exact same scene file so that you can follow along step by step with everything that I do. Alright, so before we get into it, I just want to let you guys know that you don't need the newest version of Xparticles to do it. This actually works with 3.5 because we're not really doing a true liquid simulation. What we're doing is creating particles and colliding them onto the object and then turning them into liquid afterwards. Alright, so with your scene loaded up, let's go ahead and create ourselves an XP system. So go ahead and drop that guy in there. And what we'll want to do is click on XP system, go down here to generator, go down to emitter, and so now you can see that the particles are shooting backwards. So let's go ahead and flip this guy by switching Z plus to Z minus. Let's restart this, and now it's shooting forward. Cool. So let's go ahead and position this guy a little bit easier over here so that it shoots almost like it's coming out of his mouth. But when you shoot it, all the particles are just going right through him as if nothing's there. So what we want to do is go ahead and click on our 3D model, which is this ZBrush default group. So go ahead and click on your 3D model. It actually might help out if you go ahead and drop this guy into your other objects folder. This way we can kind of keep a nice tidy workspace. So here in tags, let's go down to XP particle tags and let's go to XP collider. Cool. So now you should see a result pretty quickly. Everything starts bouncing right off of it. And if you can't really see it, let me go ahead and change my emitter so that you guys can see it. Okay. So see how they're bouncing off and going off into space? It looks very splashy and even creates a bit of a tunnel here. All the different particles fly all over the place. However, there is this sort of chunk right here that just goes straight in a straight line without really any sort of randomization or anything like that. What we want to do is introduce a little bit of turbulence to it. And so let's go ahead and click on our XP system. Let's go here to our motion modifiers and let's go ahead and just drop into turbulence. And so now when we press play, it'll start adding a little bit more randomization. It'll start looking a little crazier. So we're gonna add a little bit more strength to this guy by adding 5 to our current 5. So let's make it 10. And so now we'll see what it does. And it starts a little sooner. It doesn't. Before it was starting around here. Now it's starting almost immediately. Furthermore, we kind of want to add a little bit more customization to it. Right now this looks nice, but I think adding a little bit more randomization can help us go a little bit further. So in your XP collider tag right here, you have all these different options for bouncing. So if you go ahead and turn up your bounce to something like 100, and then you turn up your bounce variation to something like 60 or 70 around that part. So when you add a little bit more bounce to it, it adds an element of chaos to it a bit. So now these guys are bouncing a little bit more violently, a little bit more energetic. And so obviously you can tone this down to however you want, but I personally want it to look like it's being splashed onto his body. So with our bounce and our turbulence working together, we have a little bit more randomization, a little bit more chaos introduced into this guy. So let's go ahead and let it play for a little bit. What we want to do is set up a second emitter so we can get the forehead splash as seen in the original image. So by holding down control, I'm gonna go ahead and drag this out, create a second emitter. I'm gonna bring this guy forward a little bit up, and then I'm gonna rotate it 180 degrees and maybe aim it down just a bit. So now when we press play, we have a little bit more particles bouncing around. Cool. So let me just kind of bring this guy a little closer so it doesn't take so long for the collisions to take place. And if you're having a hard time seeing them, you can always change the colors. So here I can just change it into like a blue, and so now we have two different colors colliding with one another. And so you can kind of see them mixing there, which looks cool. Okay, so we have our two emitters set up. We have a little bit of bounce and we have some turbulence. And together, these guys all work together to create a very splashy sort of look. What we want to do now is convert all these particles into a liquid. And the easiest way to do that is to use a Skinner object. So go ahead and click on your XP system, hit your generator, and then go down to Skinner. Alright, so when we press play, you'll see that there's a lot of blobbiness going on right now. This is not really what I'm going for. We really need to fine tune this guy a little bit. The default doesn't look super great. So let's go ahead and change our surface from heart to fluid. And right away, it starts making changes to it. And this one, what it does is that it tries creating little globules. And so what you want to do is bring down your surface level down a bit, something around 20, 25, 30, so that it looks a little bit more splashy. You know, like when something hits water, it kind of creates, you know, these different like smaller bits with bigger bits. So we're trying to recreate that look. And the best way to do that is through your surface level and also through your custom radius. So here in your custom radius, if you start trucking it back and forth, you start finding this nice little look to it. So here there's like nothing, here it's too much, but right here in the middle there's nice chunkiness in certain areas that have high densities, and then there's these smaller bits where there's not. And on top of that, we also need to change our polygon size. So right now I'm in line mode, so I can see how big these polygons are. So as you can see, they're pretty big. What you want to do is bring this guy down. So if we drop it in half to 5, you start seeing that there's more detail being pushed in. And then I'm gonna drop it down to 2. So there we go. We have ourselves something that resembles a little bit more of a fluid. So the problem with this is that it's generating a ton of geometry. And depending on how powerful your machine is, this might actually be very taxing. Before we drop down anything, let's keep messing around with the surface level. And also the custom radius. Okay. So the custom radius seems to look best around 15-ish. Let me go ahead and put it at 10. So here you can get a little bit more of a sprinkly kind of feel. I want a little bit more, you know, more body to it. So let's go ahead and bring this guy up just a bit. So yeah, I think 15 is looking good. Let's go ahead and bring down our surface level. Nice. So yeah, I hope you guys can see what's going on. The custom radius helps determine how far the particles start connecting, whereas the surface level sort of shrinks down the amount of volume. So basically they're reaching out very far trying to create as many connections, but it's very thin. And so you start getting these nice sort of like sheet-like meshes. So let's go ahead and just keep bringing that guy down just a bit. I'm really liking where this is going. So around 5 seems to be a nice liquidy look. So now that we have this guy set up, all we have to do is just duplicate it and set our second emitter to get skinned, and we have ourselves some liquid. So, but before we do all that, let's go ahead and start renaming some of these guys. So this is going to be the head emitter. This one's going to be the mouth emit. And our first skinner is our head skinner. So let's go ahead and duplicate that guy. Call this guy mouth skinner. So I'm going to shut down my skinners. while I make some of these changes. I usually don't like to let my Skinner object be active while I make certain adjustments to it. Whenever I'm getting a looked at, such as changing the surface level or the custom radius, that makes a lot of sense. But when I'm switching inputs and stuff like that, I usually try not to risk that. So on our mouth Skinner, let's go ahead and remove this head emit, and let's go ahead and drop in the mouth emit. So now they should have the same settings, and so they should look relatively similar. Okay, I think we need to play this a little longer because these mouth particles, they're not very far. So let's go ahead and turn off our Skinners, press play, let these guys go for a little bit longer. Now let's reactivate. And so now we have crazier looking liquids. They're just splashing all over the place. And so here we're basically at the point where we're going to start lighting it and texturing it. So let's go ahead and activate our Octane render. So instead of Cinema4D, I like to use Octane render. Whatever you decide to use, it's up to you. You use physical, whatever. There's nothing that I'm doing here that you can't do in any other render. So first, before we start doing any lights and any textures, let's go ahead and make sure that our camera is set up correctly. Use this composition tag. So here, when you enable it, you can activate your grid. You can do a golden section, a golden spiral, whatever. I like to activate the grid and just keep it at 3x3, and that way I can work within the rules of 3. And so here, I want to make sure that the eyeball, or where the eye would be, is really close to one of the thirds, but not too much to the thirds because I think it'll break the rest of the image. So something around the center, but kind of close. So you can see it right there. Its proximity is pretty close. And so now we have this nice flowing liquid look. So with this golden spiral, you can see that there's a guiding line throughout the image. It wasn't originally intended, but because it kind of does match it a little bit, it's a good idea to try to match some of these lines together to kind of give it a little bit of a better design aesthetic. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and just position this guy. Kind of want him like this. Go ahead and hit a protection tag on our camera so it doesn't move. Should see protection. Cool. Let's go ahead and just leave our camera up. And now let's go ahead and just bring in the light. I have this little button that just has a lot of Octane functions, but if you go over here to your objects and you go down to your Octane area light, just drop this guy to the bottom, pointing upwards. Let's drop it 90 degrees and just pull it down. I also like to use my orthographic views when I'm placing lights. I grab these guys' little handles and I start moving the stuff around. The reason I like to do a light underneath, especially for subject matter such as this where it's a horror themed element, is because when you flash a light underneath your face when you're telling a scary story, it just looks really unnatural. And so you can bring a lot of that stuff, real life lighting techniques, into 3D. And one of the things that I like to do is add some of those weird sort of elements to it. So let's go ahead and tone this guy down a little bit. He's a little bright. And let's also darken the background. The way you do that is by creating an HDRI environment. Here, now it creates like a white environment, but if you go ahead and grab the power and bring it all the way down, you get yourself a black area. And so now everything that's being lit is just by the lights. Alright, so let's go ahead and go to our right view. I'm gonna make a copy of this light by dragging it up. And then I'm gonna rotate it. Now it's pointing down, and we have light coming from the top and bottom. So I'm lighting everything as a clay sort of texture so we can see how the light is being treated, how it looks, and how the shadows, more importantly, are being represented. So let's go to our top view, and I'm going to shift this top light around. And so when you have it out here, it's kind of just casting a huge light that just lights up the whole thing. but I want this to be a little bit more moody. So I'm gonna go ahead and push this guy over until we just have this nice little rim light. And so now all of our attention is down here in this little area. And that's really important because we want to be able to guide the viewer's eye, but we also want to balance it. So if I were to completely remove this top light, this area would just look like a complete, dark abyss, and that's not necessarily something I want. I want there to feel like it's in the darkness, but also I want there to be a little bit of separation from that black silky background. So let's go ahead and activate this guy again, and while we're at it, let's go ahead and drop this Octane sky all the way down to the bottom, and that way we have our lights on just left over. Cool. So one more light that I want to build is a backlight. It's not necessarily a rim light, but it's just I want a light shining to the back of his head. So with our orthographic views, let's go to right. Let's go ahead and snap this guy to 90, and let's bring him down. So now with this guy, what we can do is we can bring it forward, and it can cast a little bit more light this way. But we want to bring down the power. So bring it down just a bit. What we want to do is this one's going to function more like our fill light, where we're just going to kind of just throw in some light where there's shadows, so that it's not like a complete black area on his head. And so we can kind of see that there's a little bit more detail being added to these areas. Let's go ahead and make this a 3. Okay, so now we have this nice little gray area. It's still a little too powerful, so let's just do a 2.5. Let's do a 2. I think it's probably better. Let's just do that. And now we don't have any front lights, so let's go ahead and grab that same light, and we're just going to hold down Control and drag it. We're going to put it to the front, then we're going to rotate it 180, and let's see how this guy looks when we crank it up. Let's do 50%. Okay, that's way too bright. 20. Again, let's just do 10. Let's see what that looks like. It looks okay. I'm just going to drop this down to maybe 5. And this guy, I'm going to move him around and see what happens as I shift him around. So if I put him on the other side, it creates this big shadow right here. We don't want that. So what we want to do is bring this a little bit over to fill in some of these dark areas. But let's keep dropping them down to 3. Okay, I like that actually. So it has a little bit of shadow, it's not too much, and there's a little bit of darkness to his head, to the back, and there's this nice little rim light. So now we can start texturing this guy. Let's go ahead and create ourselves a specular material. You do that by going over here to material, and then you go down here to specular, but I have mine docked here on top of my material palette. Let's go ahead and drop this material onto our mouth skinner and give it a sec. And so now you can see that there is some translucency going on right here. Let's go ahead and double click this guy and open him up. Let's go into our transmission tab, and this bottom one, I want it to be red. So I'm going to drop down all these other colors until we have red. I'm going to drop it down a little bit so it's more of a dark red. Cool. So let's go ahead and duplicate this guy. You do that by holding down Control and then dragging. Cool. So now let's go ahead and make ourselves a purple. Nice. So now let's drop that onto our other skinner. Okay, so now we have textures on both of our liquids. But I'm noticing something here is that we don't really notice the light too much going through the liquid. We kind of want there to be a little bit of refraction going on. So the best way to do that is to duplicate one of our lights. I think just this top one is fine. It's basically our front. Let's hold down Control and drag. We'll bring it over, and then we're going to push it basically right here where we see the face. And let's go ahead and rotate this guy until he's facing the camera. Cool. So we can see it right now, so let's go ahead and deactivate that. In fact, let's do that to all of the lights. Let's select all of these Octane light tags. Let's go to visibility, and here in camera visibility, let's go ahead and deactivate that guy. So it might be a good idea to rename a lot of this stuff. I'm just going to go ahead and call this one out in particular. This one's going to be called the liquid glow. And so the reason I put a light there is so that we can see all these nice little translucency effects going on through the objects. And so I think if we drop in a few more, if you kind of move it around, you can see it kind of creating this really nice glow effect. I think placing it where the head is, it creates a nice little glow so that we can focus where it's important, and that's basically the face. But I think that this bottom right corner is a little dark, so let's go ahead and drag out a copy and let's place it around there. Let's switch over to our right view. Let's go ahead and drop this guy a little bit down. Let's also shrink him down a little bit. And let's actually move him over this way. There we go. This way we have this nice like glow effect that goes from the top of the head all the way down to the bottom to where the chin is. Cool. So I think honestly the only thing that's missing is a texture on the face. So the material that I originally used on this skull is actually found here inside materials, and then go right here to open live DB. So there's a lot of materials that you can choose from here. I mostly like to go inside of miscellaneous. There's always a lot of different materials to choose from. But here's a fun fact about that model that I gave you guys. It's actually UV unwrapped, so you can actually paint it inside of body paint. Or if you have Substance Painter, you can actually paint it inside of there. But that's for a different tutorial. I just want to show you guys a couple of procedural materials that you can use. So here inside of this miscellaneous, you just have this huge library of stuff, which is nice. So I'm just gonna give it a look, just find something that could work. Maybe this airline plastic looks pretty cool. And let's see. Alright, so this one's called brush steel. Let's go ahead and see how these guys look. Alright, so airline plastic. Let's go ahead and drop this onto our skull. Let's see how that looks. I don't really like that too much. Let's see what our steel looks like. Oh, that looks fancy. That looks kind of cool actually. I didn't realize that it would look like that. So let's go ahead and check this guy out from different angles. So it kind of creates this cool little streak effect. So that's cool. Cool. I actually really like that. What I'm going to do, it's kind of set to UV. So I'm going to go ahead and tile this twice. And that way I can have smaller lines. But I really like this effect. I'm going to have to adjust some of the lighting a little bit because this area right here is very blown out. So let's go ahead and select our first light. Move it off to the side so it doesn't cast so much light. But you can see it right there kind of shifting over. And it's still casting a lot of light onto the liquids, which is something we want. But let's go ahead and kind of split the difference there. And let's go ahead and drop this guy down just a bit to 10. Okay, maybe 5. Alright, so yeah, now we have a little bit of a bright area, which is nice. And we still have a little bit of a bright area at the top here, but I'm okay with it. So our last little bit of detail that we want to add is adding a little bit of depth of field. So let's go ahead and just go into our thin lens. Let's go ahead and drop down our f-stop. I usually drop it down to set our aperture to 5 centimeters. And you can already see some of it. Let's deactivate autofocus. Let's click on our focus indicator here. And let's just click where the eyeball is. So we can get focus on where it's important, and that's the face. And so I don't feel like the depth of field is doing enough work. Let's go ahead and crank this guy up. Let's double it. Change it from 5 to 10. It looks a little better. Let's go ahead and add 20. And so here we kind of start to get a little bit more of a stylistic look. There's a lot of, it's almost like we're looking at a macro shot of liquid, and so there's a lot of things that are out of focus. The focus range is very thin, so we have to be very careful with that. And if you notice, the face is actually really out of focus. The thing that's actually in focus right now is actually the cheekbones. So let's go ahead and try to adjust this guy by clicking here on the nose, and I actually hit a particle and it's completely blown out everything. So let's go ahead and click around it. Okay, cool. So here's where you kind of want to decide how shallow of a depth of field you want to have. I think that maybe 20 is a little too strong, so let's go ahead and drop it down to 15. Let's go ahead and try to get that area. I think it might be better just to have the cheekbones in focus. But where on the cheekbone? Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's try to get the teeth in focus. There we go. Awesome. So yeah, I think we're ready to render. But wait, there's more. I completely forgot to tell you guys one last bit before you do any sort of rendering. So inside of your skinner, there is this option for the polygon size, but there's also this one right next to it that says render polygon size. You want to make sure that you make those guys the same size. So right now, if you notice, my render polygon size is set to 5 centimeters. So it's going to render basically twice the size than what it currently is. So if you go ahead and change this guy down to 2, they will now render how you see it in the viewport. And it's very important to do that. Otherwise, you're going to get a very different looking result. So just keep that in mind. I'm sorry I should have brought that up earlier. And that's how you make a liquid effect inside of Cinema4D using Xparticles. So if you guys like what you saw, make sure you give this guy a thumbs up. If you guys want to see more tutorials like this in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell icon so you can be notified every time there's a new tutorial available. Until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Alright, peace.